name's Connie Bostic. I'm chair of the board of directors of the Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center, and I'd like to welcome you all to this event. It's been an amazing weekend so far. It's been really great. A few housekeeping things. If you have a cell phone, please turn it off. I'll give you a minute. Also, at the end, when we have questions and answers, you've been asked to come forward and line up near the microphone so that the videotape will get everybody. There's a mic right over there for you. There's so many people that we have to thank for this event. Brian Butler has done an amazing job again this year. Thank you, Brian. Helen Weichel at the library here at UNCA has been an invaluable friend to our organization. We're so grateful for Helen. And of course, nothing would ever happen around here without Alice Sebrel. I'd like to thank all the presenters. I've never had 2 days with as many new ideas and new things to think about as I've had in the past 2 days. So thank you all so very much for being here and for your presentations. UNCA has been a great blessing to our organization, and we're extremely grateful. The staff in this building this weekend has been phenomenal. It's been a great experience, I think, for everybody here. The provost, Jane Fernandez, will now introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to UNC Asheville. We are delighted to co-host this conference and help perpetuate and extend the bountiful I'm sorry, I pressed the button. How do I get it on? I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, okay. We are delighted to help perpetuate and extend the bountiful legacy of Black Mountain College. So how to describe our keynote presenter this evening? A sculptor, engineer, atomic scientist, photographer. Critics have struggled to characterize Kenneth Snelson and the magnificent body of work he has created. In response to attempts to pigeonhole his accomplishments, he quotes the refrain, "Hardening of the categories leads to art disease." Very creative. Born in Pendleton, Oregon, where his father owned a camera store, Kenneth Snelson grew up taking photographs. Fascinated by model building, he began with hobby store kits and then designed and created his own models. In an essay entitled Portrait of an Atomist, Howard Fox writes, by imaginatively dissecting objects and structures existing in the real world and reforming them in his models, Snelson had a sense of creating a universe of his own. After studying at the Corcoran School of Art and the University of Oregon, in 1948, Kenneth Snelson enrolled in the summer session at Black Mountain College. Believing the highest order of art to be painting, he aimed to study it under Josef Albers, the Bauhaus master who had left Berlin when the Nazis shut down the Bauhaus school. On seeing some of the objects his young student had created for his three-dimensional design class, Josef Albers declared them the work of a sculptor and steered Kenneth into a passion for sculpture. Score one for effective mentoring. Score another point when a little-known Buckminster Fuller arrived that summer at Black Mountain College, where he conducted early experiments with geodesic domes. Fuller's influence developed in Snelson a fascination with the geometry and mysticism of structure, leading him to understand structure as the underlying principle behind all form. Mr. Snelson returned to Black Mountain College the following summer, bringing with him a model he'd created of 2 plywood X pieces held together by tension cords. Fascinated by the model and its implications, Fuller coined the term tensegrity to describe its dynamic structure. Although his student preferred the term floating compression to convey the structural balance between tension and compression, Fuller had a marketer's knack, and tensegrity won the day. Whatever the terminology, Kenneth Snelson proceeded to create sculptures with dynamic plays of forces in which no element can be removed without impairing the integrity of the whole. His sculptures echo a universe in which all things are interconnected. After the 2 Black Mountain College summers, Mr. Snelson went on to study with Fernand Léger and to carve out a distinguished career. Along with sculptures, he produced models of atoms, some of them patented, and panoramic photographs revealing the detailed structural connectivity of reality. His one-man show spanned 5 decades and the globe. His awards and honors are abundant. His work is displayed in prestigious venues across the country, Europe, and Japan. So back to my original question, how to describe a man whose celebrated career touches on sculpture, photography, atomic science, and engineering. Kenneth Snelson makes it clear, I'm not an engineer nor scientist. My training is in art, and I make art. Well, he trained with great artists, and he makes magnificent art. In Portrait of an Atom, he wrote, "It may be that artists are the last of the speculative philosophers." I really find that very funny. That's fascinating. Yeah, okay. As a philosopher, Mr. Snelson helps us ponder the nature of the universe. As an artist, he lets us envision it. Please welcome Kenneth Snelson.
That was a very thorough and generous introduction. Thank you. I have an awful lot of slides to show, I confess, and different things to talk about. And I sort of wing it. So I put this together with a lot of care, but I don't really remember always what slide follows which, so I have to be instructed by what I see on the screen. Anyway, what I wanted to show here, I introduced you to my family. We went to Alaska in the summer for a few days. The whole family. That's my wife on the opposite side from me on the left, and my son-in-law, daughter, and 2 grandchildren type people. It was very funny because we put these life belts on, life things on, and my son-in-law, who was a Navy SEAL, said, "This is really laughable." He said, "We'll all be dead in 10 minutes in this cold water, but at least they'll find the bodies were afloat." Anyway, I just wanted to show the family. I'm going through the history briefly, how I got to Black Mountain. In fact, this is the town I came from, Pendleton, Oregon. It's a very horsey cowboy town. If you know the rodeo circuit, it's one of those major rodeo circuits, and that was the main attraction for this town. My father was in the laundry business, but he was always interested in photography. And later, I'll show you, this is my mother. This, I think, in the middle of it is very fetching. It's her bridal photograph, I'm sure. My father's a big photographer. She came from the Bronx, a Jewish Hungarian girl from the Bronx, meeting this guy who picked her up in a car, and they moved out for some unknown reason to Pendleton, Oregon. It took me until I was 22 or 23 to move back to New York. Anyway, this is my father's camera shop. It was a crazy idea. It was middle of the Depression, 1932, and for some reason, in addition to the laundry, which was making a reasonable living, he decided to open a camera shop in a small town where nobody could afford nor was interested in expensive cameras. And pretty soon, he had Leicas and Rolleiflexes and all of it. Oh, thank you so much. So anyway, that's how I began. My father did local photographs, and he also did panoramas. These were panoramas. That's a we call it Indian Village at the Roundup, and excuse me. So later on, that's how I got interested in panoramas. But there was a photographer at the time. You've got to understand, and I'm sure that other people from small towns would understand, that in small town, in those days, nobody knew anything about art. It wasn't discussed. It wasn't part of the vocabulary. It wasn't part of what one just thought about. You had no idea about it. So here I was taking pictures, and I sort of wondered how people, because I looked at photo magazines and I thought, how come these people got their pictures published in that magazine? And some of the small publications that Dad had in the shop for sale gave me information. And there was one particularly, there's a crazy photographer, very popular at the time. He's been resurrected recently. Maybe some people know of him, William Mortensen. But these are the kind of montage, grotesque things or sexual things that he did. Of course, that was all very interesting to a young boy. But the command to look gave me the first insight into composition. He had a picture of a nude who was standing in a curvilinear S shape, and he said, because as primitive people, we were noticed and were frightened of snakes crawling through the grass, S shapes. That's how we would be attracted to an S shape. And then he had a big figure that was clipped on all sides coming at you, and he said, a person approaching you this close is fair. Anyway, those are the rules. And that was my first introduction to William Mortensen. And by the way, that book, he's come back into that little booklet now sells for around $400 on eBay. Anyway, but I started building things. That was for the very beginning. I wanted to be a drummer at a time, but model airplanes were the big attraction to boys in those days, built out of balsa sticks and Japanese tissue. It was laborious. We didn't have television. We didn't have computer games, and people had really time to do that sort of thing. And you learned patience, and we learned basic crafts that later became useful in Albers class, because I was awfully good at wire bending and those sorts of things. But anyway, I luckily got into the World War II 2 months before Hiroshima, so everything was finished, and I got, in those days, most wonderful things that could have happened to a young man is to get through that war and get 4 years of college on the GI Bill. And they didn't care where you went to school. You could study hairdressing in Italy if you wanted to. It's too bad it's very limited, that kind of thing now. But see who it put me in touch with the Black Mountain, Josef Albers and Bucky Fuller. There was a wonderful teacher where I started painting school at the University of Oregon. I went to Institute of Design in Chicago with Serge Chermayeff was there, and then to Paris with Léger. So this was all government paid, and I wouldn't be here at all, obviously, if it hadn't been for the GI Bill. I did painting, the sort of thing that one got involved in those days, a little bit of everybody's work. But then at the University of Oregon, I had been there 2 years as a painting student, and I found a book in the art school library about the Bauhaus, and we were very excited about the painters of the Bauhaus, Kandinsky and Klee and the whole group of them. So I read that Albers had left Germany because of Hitler, and he was at this small school. Knew nothing about the school. I mean, it was a place that was mentioned in a book, but it didn't say anything about what kind of school it was, except it was an art school, as far as I saw. So a friend who had a car also signed up. We went there and discovered Black Mountain. And 2 weeks into the session, Albers would not permit new people to go into his painting class, so I felt a little bit put off because I had to go back into a basic design course, which was called the foundation course, of course. And it was very similar to the foundation course, which by that time had reached all over the United States. The Bauhaus idea was in many, many schools, as it was in the University of Oregon. So I took his color course, and I took his foundation course. And I was very good at that because I had built model airplanes, and I had done photography. So 2 weeks into the course, 2 weeks into the end of the session, Albers told me that the architecture professor who had canceled was being replaced by a man named Buckminster Fuller. And could I please help Professor Fuller put his models together? And I thought, well, I understood why he chose me, because I really was doing good work in his class. But I thought, I'm not an architect, and I don't put these little houses together. I don't know what he's got, roofs, you know, it's easy stuff. So I went to this trailer where Bucky had brought all of his paraphernalia down. It was significant, by the way, that he arrived. The same day, he decided to give a talk, and I'm sure that he was panicked that he was going to spend 1 day there without everybody knowing who Buckminster Fuller was. So anyway, I helped him put these things together, and I thought it was really interesting material, all this geometrical stuff. I had no idea what it was about, what he was about. And nobody in the college, except perhaps a couple of professors who may have heard about some sensational things. He had an automobile that was that became infamous, I guess, in Chicago earlier. But he was a stranger, and he stood on the podium, the platform, really just, it's a flat plane, and he said, he just stood there, frozen, it seemed, absolutely, seemingly panicked. What was I going to say? Everybody was getting very uncomfortable. And then, of course, he went on for one of his 3 or 4 hour talks. Went on. All of the student body was mesmerized by him, I think. Most were. I think the professors had some reservations, especially the math professor, Professor Dane, and I really don't know what the reaction, but they tried to act very, very polite, but it wasn't, he was talking about things that was in their field, and they were specialists in that field, and I always suspected that they were not totally consumed by his charm. but everybody turned up for his classes every day. I mean, it was just as if there was a herd going to this one place where Bucky was talking. And his subject was Bucky Fuller. He talked about the Dymaxion car. He spoke beautifully about mankind as being a creature that had extensions. Those were the extensions were the tools that we use, and those are really part of our body just in the same way that a spider web is part of the spider and so forth, this sort of thing. It was all, it was sort of colored by, there was a guy named Alfred Korzybski who talked about words and meaning of words, semantics and so forth, and this sort of was in Bucky's description of reality of the universe, and it was a novel way. It was a novel way of thinking at that time, and especially I'm not sure that he would have been quite so effective in today's world, even if he had today's vocabulary and today's message, because it was a time right after World War II when everybody really thought technology in many forms was going to save the world, and he certainly was the person who had all of the description of this world of the future. So anyway, for the rest of the summer, since I had been chosen as his monitor, I listened to him talk endlessly. He could not talk. He could not talk. He had to have an audience, and pretty soon the professors who were his peers got very dragged having to listen to Bucky, because as Isamu Noguchi said about Bucky, said when Bucky came in the room, nobody else existed, which is really quite true. He just sort of took over in some quiet way. He would start talking, and pretty soon people were listening. Pretty soon the room was quiet, and Bucky was going on and on and on. So I became his audience, and I became quite consumed by this man. I became the first, I think, of the sort of followers of Bucky, which lasted about a year, so that was Black Mountain for me at the very beginning. Ken Nolan was there, as you see in this bottom of this picture, and Bill DeCooney. It was an exciting summer. I didn't know what other summers were like, but this was a very special time. And at the end of that summer, I went back to Pendleton, Oregon. I wasn't planning to be a full-time student. And I went back to my hometown, and I was terribly depressed. It must have depressed my parents even more that I came back moping. And, but I had to come down from this magical ivory tower into Pendleton, Oregon. And so I started to make things, which I had always done anyway, but now, oh, by the way, I missed something. See, I knew I was out of line. This is the famous supine dome that didn't stand up as he thought he anticipated. I don't know that he actually thought it was going to work, but other people were convinced that he had convinced them that it was going to work. So everybody worked hard on it. I think it was a general disappointment that the aluminum Venetian blind slats that were supposed to stand up as a dome didn't stand up as a dome. And his wonderful rationalization, he went to the top of the studies building, which looked down on this field where the dome lay like a spread out spider web or something. And he said he had a book with microphotography, and he had a picture of the fruit flies chromosomes, I guess it was. And he said, look, this is fantastic. Look, that's what we're replicating out there. And whenever Bucky got into a romantic state like that, where you couldn't say, it doesn't look like that at all to me. Everybody said, yeah, you know. And so you learn very quickly not to cross Bucky. He had his ideas about things, and they were always right. And so So anyway, that's what happened with this dome thing. Anyway, going back to Pendleton, Oregon, I started making things. It was influenced by both Bucky and Albers, and of course, everything had to do with strings, tension members. And I started to make these things, and I made a particular set. They could have been made by possibly Calder, whom I knew about, and or later George Rickey did these kind of moving things. On the left, you see a series of modules that are hinged by wire, wrapped wire, and it moved. It was the weights on the bottom of each of the modules supported those above, so it was based on that famous little Indian toy trick that you put a figure on the top of a bottle or on top of a table and it sort of wobbles. So in the second stage, I thought, oh, it's obvious that I could replace those hinges with strings. I was all into strings by then. And so this middle one had a different configuration. Each of the modules was like the central angle of a tetrahedron. That is, two goes like this and two go like that. And it looked rather magical because the parts didn't actually touch by hard materials, but by tension members only in the suspension. So then I saw that it was the next reasonable step. This could be a stable thing by removing the weights and tying off the degrees of freedom were permitted to move, and suddenly there was a stable structure. It was very exciting because especially it could grow in each one of those quadrants, could take a module out in any direction. You could fill all space with this thing. As this model on the upper right here, I brought that back to Black Mountain that summer, and I showed it to Bucky, and he was obviously I had sent him photographs because I had tried a trimester at University at Corvallis, Oregon State College in engineering, which was a disaster for me. And I'd sent him photographs of these, but I don't think he had understood the photographs. Maybe they weren't very good photographs. And so when he saw the actual plywood thing, he said, "Ken, may I keep this?" And I hadn't brought it as a gift, and I liked it, but he was a professor, and he said, so, you know what, sure. The next day, he said, you know, it's a very interesting structure, but it's wrong. I said, oh. He said, instead of the X's, it should be the central angle of a tetrahedron, which is where I had started with the moving piece, the previous moving piece. But as I said, he was always right. You know, it was that 2,000-year-old man line said there was the wheel. We didn't know what to call it. You know, actually, when that guy invented the wheel, he probably didn't know what to use it for either. He couldn't have anticipated an automobile. So the same thing was true of this structure. Two things supported each other by tension members. Compression, the compression part supported by tension members. But he asked me to go to Asheville, in fact, and get some curtain rods. And so I made this other one according to his prescription, which is the one he's always shown holding there in the lower left. By the way, the people up there were all there that summer. The second summer, Bucky brought with him a group of 12 students from Institute of Design in Chicago. They were product design students initially, but they got interested in the idea of domes, of spheres, and they called themselves the Spheres. They had come down with him to Black Mountain, and they were there as a sort of team unit. They weren't, I could only say they weren't typical Black Mountain students. They were practical guys and girls who wanted to design products. That's why they had been to. And so, because they were Bucky's group, there was a sort of teasing resentment about their consolidated association or something. And they got wind of this, and so they all, 12 of them, they all dressed that there was an Indian dancer there, and he told them how to dye cloth to make an Indian costume with the, I don't know what you call those things, the costume that's made of like cheesecloth, gauze. So they made these things, dyed them, and they all made hats. And the insignia said JC, because they had been teased about being Jesus Christ's disciples. And boy, this did not go over well. And of course, Bucky was humiliated by it. He made an announcement the next day that he wanted to know that he was quite the most ordinary of men. That was supposed to solve that problem. But those were the spheres, and they were busy building a design that was referred to at the time as a geodesic dome that was characterized as a necklace, because here it is, those tubular parts are strung together with wires that go through the tubes. And this geometry was not the final geometry that he ended up with, that we all know and love, the geodesic dome, which is based on an icosahedral geometry in which the triangles of the icosahedron are modularized, made smaller and smaller depending upon how many frequencies, as they're referred to. So this initial dome was the same geometry as the previous summer's Venetian blind geometry. But what happened to me that summer was I lost my virginity. And so there was this young girl from Canada, student Joy Ballin. She won't mind my telling us. We're long ago. And so here it was competition. She was not enamored of Bucky, and Bucky had pulled a couple of things on me that I really didn't like. I mean, I had made a structure, and he scolded me for not bringing that structure to class, and I felt, damn it, that's mine, I made it. And so it was the same sort of proprietorship about this plywood thing. Joy, for her part, she would say, you know, I was sitting in Bucky's lecture today, and I thought, I really have got to go out and save the world. And she said, then I come outside and I realized I don't know how. Bucky, for his part, said about Joy, he said, it's a very strange girl. I saw her just standing, looking at her feet yesterday. Very, very strange. So I was being fought over in this curious way. Anyway, I went for one semester, having left Black Mountain, went to Chicago Institute of Design. I was in yet another foundation course, the third one, and I was not crazy about it. And so I went to New York, and I started working in the film business, and then a couple of friends had gone to Paris on GI Bill, and I made contact with Leger Studio, and so I went there for a year, and that was wonderful. I spent most of my time doing photography. In fact, there's this panorama that's at the bottom that's in the show over at the Black Mountain College Museum. I didn't intend it initially as a panorama, since it's a scroll, which had a number of pictures. It was shot in Bois de Boulogne, and there were some boys playing soccer, and so it made a sort of a nice panorama. But anyway, I came back to New York. I had to make a living, and so I got a job in the film business, and I worked in films. I always said that the film making was my Medici, the medium was my Medici, because I was in the union by then, and I could make enough money in 1 or 2 days not to work for the rest of the month. So I had a really ideal situation to do my own work and so forth. Boy, this is taking a lot longer than I ever imagined. Anyway, I started to make things. There was a museum show of Bucky's work in 1959 at the Museum of Modern Art, and he asked me to come look at the tensegrity tower that was being built. I had really decided I wanted out of that because I was very hurt by the whole thing that happened with him. In 1951, there was an article published in the Architectural Forum that had that structure in it, and it didn't have my name on it at all, and I was hurt. So anyway, I went to this. I had been in analysis, by the way, by that time, when I went there, he invited me, his assistant invited me to go there to see the new tensegrity structure that was going to be in that show. And by that time, I had the nerve to say, is my name going to be on it? And that really made him flustered, and his assistant, he said, oh, I'm sure Arthur Drexler, the curator, knows all about you, Ken. And his assistant said, I don't think Arthur knows anything about Ken. let's go ask him. So anyway, that's how I got my name on this piece. And it was a very enormous relief, and it really set me to work again, feeling that I had some proprietorship with this idea. And so that's when I started really to find out nobody in all of those 10 years that had passed really had the interest, the energy, or the focus somehow or another to explore what this kind of structure is about. Bucky had shown only his, by the way, what he said about the X piece that I had given to him was that it disappeared in the summer from his room. He doesn't know what happened to it. So nobody ever saw that or the picture of it in all those 10 years. So anybody who tried to emulate this structure went for his geometry, and it was a very limited thing because you could only grow linearly with it. You could only take in one direction, where my initial X form could go in all directions. So anyway, that's how I started really seriously to explore the possibilities. It's funny, this picture up here of me, I got a loft on Spring Street in New York, downtown, and had a guy fixing up lofts. It was illegal. You couldn't live in these lofts legally. So you had to be very careful about somebody knocking on your door, and it turns out to be a cop. So the guy who did this, putting plumbing in for me in this place, I said, Andy, I don't know how I'm going to, if somebody comes in, what do people do? Because he installed a lot of loft. He says, oh, you don't worry about it. You tell him you live someplace else. I said, come on, I live someplace else. I've got my clothes in the closet here, for God's sake. He said, look, tell him you're a natty dresser and you got a place. You wouldn't live in a dump like this. So I always look at this picture and I think of myself as a natty dresser. Anyway, but you can see that all of the experimenting that I did gave me a lot of information about what was possible, and so that's what started. Anyway, I wanted to go back to the subject of tensegrity, or floating compression. I seem to be stuck with the word tensegrity. The moment that the name came out, Bucky began to say what to me are ridiculous things. He said, tensegrity, when properly examined, everything in the universe is tensegrity. I thought, well, if everything's tensegrity, what do we need the name for? Then nothing is tensegrity. There's a story about a boy who finds some gold from a gnome or something in the forest, and the gnome says he can take the gold with him if he unties him. And so the boy says, okay. He said, I will tie my handkerchief to this tree, and that way I'll be able to find the gold. So he lets the gnome go, and when he comes back to the forest, every tree in the forest has a neckerchief on it. So this is what happened with Bucky with tensegrity. Everything became tensegrity. So now nobody knows what it is. No, there is no definition for it. Anything apparently with tension lines is tensegrity. So what I wanted to show you is going back to the initial question, then this simply is tensegrity. This is one of those nets that you get fruit with at the grocery store. And if you poke sticks in that so that they don't touch one another, but they rather expand the form, you have a floating compression system. It's not, the network is not defined. It's very generalized because the network is everywhere like a lacework. But still, it is a structure. It's not a very solid structure. It's very floppy. But in effect, it is an endoskeletal structure, the same way our bodies are endoskeletal, with muscles on the outside, bones on the inside. So here's the difference. A balloon is endoskeletal. It has a compression interior pushing outwardly against the tension skin. The crab is exoskeleton. It is like a building room like this with strings attached, except those strings are carefully designed so it can move its parts and so forth. But it is a structure in which it has an outside envelope of sufficient capacity so that it can maintain these muscles inside. Here's also the same contrast. On the left, you have something that is ancient kind of structure. It's a kite frame. I don't know who first made it for what purpose, but obviously it was thousands of years ago when somebody took two sticks and tied some kind of material around it to make a structure. It became a kite frame at some point. And on the right, we have contemporary tension spoke bicycle wheel. It's an exoskeletal structure. It has, in the same way that the crab has a shell on the outside, this has an external shell, a rim, and the rim supports the tension members. So all of the tension is taken up by this hard rim. Same thing is true of a spider web. A spider attaches to a tree or ground wherever it builds, and it's the outside form that becomes the compression part. So there's a definite distinction. So all of these other things had names before. This other structure didn't have a name. Kite frame had a name, but the deficiency there is that the sticks actually do touch one another, but that's a technicality. In principle, it's the same thing as tensegrity or floating compression. At any rate, I seem to have gone on and on, way past what I intended. This is called Audrey 2, Audrey 1. I've been doing these animations for a few years. I started doing computer stuff in 1987, but now I need help, and I've got a young guy who helps me. He's very, very good, named John Monahan, and we did some of these animations. I got to go through this very quickly because I'll show you some of the work, the towers. I started trying to figure out how to make a tower that tapered. And I'm not a mathematician at all, not good at math. I do everything by knowing what goes on with it and working it out with materials. So I started making, you see the tower, the shortest one, and I decided that 75% smaller each one of those modules that rises one above the other. So that's how the size is diminished. And it didn't taper nearly slowly enough. It was going to terminate very soon. So I halved that proportion, and that became the tower that is the next to the tallest, which is the one at the Hirshhorn Museum. And then I decided that I really wanted to try to go all out, so I halved that proportion again, and that's the sculpture that is the tower that's at the Kröller-Müller in Holland. But so what I had worked out was a piano scale in a way, because each one of these proportional systems allowed me to make models that were exactly proportional to what I could blow it up. And so in moving the keys from the low notes to the high notes or vice versa. So it became just by prepared mind. Another animation. Well, these are just some forms of the sculptures. Rotation, counter-rotation are one of the very fundamental aspects of many parts of nature, and this spiraling or helical form is something that occurs in all of these structures in some either intimate, that is immediate ways, one-to-one, or in a spiraling system such as that. I put too much stuff in. I did a show, I got interested in bamboo at a time back in 1971. It says 60, 71, it should be. At any rate, these are other pieces. This is a cantilever piece that was in Holland just for a show in 1970 and 71. It was 100 feet long. And what I was trying to do was find out how successful a cantilever could be reaching out like that, because the tension and the compression become very, very great when you have to pre-stress to allow for that kind of overhang, that amount of weight. This was a model on the upper left of a piece that I did. It's for a show in Berlin. That's on the lower right. It was initially called New Dimension, and later on I did a larger version of it that is in Baltimore at the Baltimore Inner Harbor. It's been there since, what, 76, I think, 77. This is an arch piece that I did a few years ago. And this is a semi-cantilever piece called Dragon. This is a piece that is at Stanford University called Mozart 1. I told people the reason I named it Mozart 1 was that I wanted, in some way, all my life to be associated with Mozart. So I thought, Mozart and Snelson, yeah. This is a piece in Grand Rapids at the Meyer Sculpture Gardens and Sculpture Park. People ask how you put these things together, and so this is a little sequence to show. This was in Paris at the Jardin du Palais Royal in 1960. And so it starts out with a network which has been put together already having been worked out, but to assemble and disassemble, this is how it's done. Those central little metal parts or hubs that fit into the tubes, and the network is, you start putting the tubes into the network, and pretty soon it's self-standing. But it's quite a job doing this. These two people that were working on it, there were a guy who's now been working on my sculptures, a man named Stewart, Philip Stewart, lives in Seattle, ingenious guy, brilliant builder of things, figure out many, many kinds of problems, wonderful guy. This is a tower that was there on that. This, that's right, because one of the pieces was there and attractive for kids, and it was very sweet. They really got turned on by it. These are, I'm not going into panoramas so much. I don't have time to do very much really with this, but I got interested in 1975 in panoramas, really reflecting on my father's work. And I found old cameras, especially circuit cameras. They're C-I-R-K-U-T is the way it's spelled for that kind of camera. And you see that one up there. It's a very big, this camera makes a negative, which is, excuse me, the negative is about 10 feet or 12 feet long, depending upon the lens you use and so forth. It's 16 inches high. So it's a very cumbersome thing. When you take a picture with this, you've committed yourself to 2 days before you get a print and find out whether it's, but anyway, it packs all up. And I made this printer, which has like Broadway lights, and you adjust to the negative by the wattage of the lamps you put in each one of these places. So, and as you can see, these are the prints hanging in my studio, just tall enough. And I at the time, I looked much younger, and I was able to take this 80-pound camera around. Most of the pictures are of Manhattan, because that's where but then I did a lot of other panoramas. Panorama to me was an exciting idea because it really is kind of fascinating to try to pick the point in this room, for instance, where as the camera rotates, something interesting is going on all around. There are many places where you can stand where you can spin 200 degrees and nothing's going on, but to find the exact place, in other words, the camera sort of tells you where to go on these locations. So what you're looking at here is 360 degrees, and somehow or another it rearranges the architecture in these cityscapes, much more interesting than a landscape, because a landscape can look like a flattened out picture, but the city really is reorganized in that way. I did get involved with high-end graphics computer back in '87, and it had to do with the atom model, and that's something I will show you about. But so I did a lot of computer pictures, both of the atom thing, and I worked with trying to do replication of sculptures. I found it was much more easy to build a model than to find out all these points and so forth. Anyway, I'm going quickly because I see we're really running out of time. I got involved in weaving. Too bad I wasn't involved with weaving with Albers, but I started being interested in the right and left-handed rotation, the same way I spoke of helical, spirally associations. Well, this goes on every time you pick up a woven garment. If you look carefully, on the upper left is a square weave, and on the lower right is a hexagonal weave. Hexagonal weaves are used mostly for baskets and sometimes used for caning. But if you look, each one of those squares in that square pattern is either rotationally right or rotationally left. All neighbors are the opposite, like a checkerboard. That is, if you put your fingers on all of those four parts and it's deep enough to sense it, you rotate your fingers and they will go downhill to accommodate the lower part of the next thread. They're just the opposite. It's a wonderful, beautiful system, a binary system, just something simple like weaving. In the hexagonal or triangular pattern, the hexagons alternate with the small triangles. So if the hexagons are left-handed, the small triangles are right-handed, and so forth. This woven ball from Indonesia, I think it is, I'm not sure. It has compartments which are triangular, hexagonal, and pentagonal. Very interesting thing that weaving a sphere like that provides those alternates in order for it to curve into a sphere. So these are the cells that are possible up above there. Crosses, 2 cross, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those can all be used in weaving. Here on the lower right is a beautiful, somebody knew all about basketry when they carved this elegant 19th century ivory ball, sphere within sphere. So the remarkable part is about that weaving is that you can do the same thing three-dimensionally. I discovered this, and I got a patent on it. I patent some of these things, not to own them particularly, but I have no other way of publishing. So I discovered that, this is the patent. Going back to this, instead of making a tetrahedron or an octahedron or these other forms, truncated, excuse me, out of just where the sticks meet one another, which is the ordinary way that you would build. If you say a kid, make a tetrahedron out of, and teach them how to make a tetrahedron out of toothpicks, why they would end up gluing the points together. But if you bypass them, something very interesting happens. First of all, you've again made a right or a left-handed statement. Either that thing spirals to the right or it spirals to the left, or helically goes to the right or left. So you can make these figures. And the amazing thing is you can make a three-dimensional weave out of this. Now, if you look on the web, you'll find some reference to a three-dimensional weave because there's a weaving machine that does in a cubical form where things bypass, and they call it three-dimensional weaving. But this is amazing that it was a discovery, and I can't find it anywhere in history. It's quite possible that sometime in the past, someplace, somebody did this, but it isn't on record. And the reason I think it isn't perfectly useless to do it, and people really only spend their time, especially in struggling societies where these things would have been made by craft people, they only do it to have it do something. Besides, they're very tedious to make. Anyway, this is a piece that I showed at my last show. It's about 6.5 feet high, I think. The time is going fast. I'm going to race through this because I know we're just way out of time. I want to show you something. I got involved in this matter of these basics of these tensegrity forms. And I began to imagine, like a game, you play an imaginary game, what would happen if? So I started imagining what would happen if, because you can make these, you can reconfigure these forms by changing the tension member dimensions and make a different figure out of it. So you can see here in this top group, it starts out more like an octahedron on the left. The second one is more open. It's close to what's called a tetrachedecahedron. The third one, going to the right, is more open, and the last one ends up as approximately a cube. So I started thinking, what I'm describing here, you'd have to make an awful lot of them in order to make a time-lapse photograph so that it really looked as if they were rotating. So I said, these are circles. So on Canal Street, I found a whole bunch of plastic circles, very cheap. And I started making these figures, every configuration I could imagine, that were like polyhedra, but they weren't polyhedra and they weren't identical. Some are identifiable with regular polyhedra, but some are random and very, very different. I found out that a certain number of them could do something rather interesting. You could alternate the colors all around, and no two colors of the same, no two same colors would touch the adjacent on the adjacent ones. And so I discovered then by sheer guess and accident, you could do this with magnets because you had a binary system. Everything's going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And so I found out there was a certain group of these that you could make out of magnets. You could make mosaics that held together, clung together magnetically in a spherical form. So that's how I got involved in this atom. I don't have time really to go thoroughly into it, but I'd love to talk to anybody who wants to afterward. I did this, I found out you could do this also with magnets that were shaped by polygons to make polyhedral forms, and those too could grow in space. Here's what will happen to these. This is a motorized thing, and the reason that it rotates is the magnets cling to one another, and so it forms a gearing system. But gearing also is a binary system. Adjacent ones move either right-handedly or left-handedly. You can also make these expand into space. Anyway, this was my dream back in 1960. I said by some magic we could shrink down to the submicrocosm and see atoms in all their details. They no doubt would be beautiful beyond belief. Physicists aren't much interested in what atoms look like. Artists may be. So this is, if you go on the web, you find, and you Google images, atom, you're going to find all of these things. Nobody knows what an atom looks like. We're stuck with this planetary model, which everybody learned about in school, but physicists no longer believe in that. Anyway, so my atom is based on those associations in which the principal point is that the moving electron in its orbit occupies exclusively the space in which it moves. In other words, it acts as if it were solid matter, in that its neighbors can't penetrate its space. So that, I believe, is the threshold of what we know as solidity. Physics does not have a better answer than that. Anyway, here's what we have. I love this picture because it's of the 6 blind men who felt the elephant and tried to tell what it looks like. That's what we have now in the physics. We have wonderful models for separate occasions, separate uses, but they don't agree with one another. But it doesn't matter because they work. Mathematically, they work. We're in the same position as the astronomers who believed that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and we've got the wrong geometry today. It all works in the same way the epicycles were calculated very closely to work for astronomy. So, but I can't get any physicist to talk to me about this. But anyway, so it's there. This is what happens. The bare electron enters near the nucleus, and the moment that it enters, it changes like a caterpillar into a butterfly, and it turns into an atomic electron, which has these properties. These are symbolically a magnetic presence, a solidity barrier, and anyway, we're going way over here.
And when I told them how wonderful you are, they didn't believe me. No, they didn't believe me. Your lips, your eyes, your curly hair, they're in a class beyond compare. You're the loveliest thing I've ever seen.
I did some stone atoms in China, but okay, there's only one animation. This is I want to show you. This is the atom that Leonardo would have made. as we know, but it's up on YouTube, and I get messages up there that said, could you please send me the original drawings? Somebody else said he was really so smart, he talked about spin. Obviously those correspond to spin, and they told me which atom. So anyway, thank you all. Is that? I think we're late. Is it? Anybody have any urgent question? Yes.
My question is, do you think that,
Oh, I see. You won't be on camera unless you're over there. That's.
Do you think that you're kind of typical of the typical Black Mountain person who comes out with a mix of different kinds of experiences that tries to put it together in a unique way? That it's not arts for art's sake or science for science sake.
Well,
but they're all.
Yeah, I did. Thanks. I didn't intend to go in any particular direction. I really just sort of. As you saw, what I was describing is I got one idea after another idea, and if I have a gift, my gift really is association, because what happens is that I see something. This is, I think, a lot of inventors have this quality, and you think, oh, that reminds me of this, and you say, oh, if that reminds you, could that be associated with this or something? That's a sort of thing that has enabled me to, so it wasn't a determined path that I chose from Black Mountain. I never worried about getting a job or that sort of thing. I fell into that business. The movie business was great, but that's yes.
If I understand correctly, you've been doing this for decades, and as far as I know, no one has ever duplicated your structures. Is that accurate? And if not, why would you speculate that's the case?
Well, there are a lot of people who are making structures of one sort or another like that, and engineers, a lot of engineers worldwide have the notions that they could make it into a building system, a practical system or something like that, which what they really fail to grasp is the enormous influence of the internal stressing. If you make one of these structures, when I make them, they are to hold themselves up. If you say, I want to put a Volkswagen on top of it, then you have to start increasing the wires, and you have to start because then you've got to increase the internal tension. Then you have to build heavier tubes. Pretty soon it's a self-defeating exercise. So that's the difficulty with them. But people are working on them. Nobody has the time, energy, nor purpose to explore the variations as I have, because I had a reason to do it, and I have a lot of determination to follow something through when I do it, simply because I want to get it done. It's not patience, it's impatience. So.
I have to admit my ignorance. Did your stay at Black Mountain overlap with Richard Lippold at all? And did he have any influence on you?
Richard was there when I was there, yeah. Richard gave me some little 1/16 inch square brass rod, in fact, when he left. And I made a little cube form out of it and strung it with dental floss in all of its geometrical crossovers. And Max Dane, the mathematician, didn't go for it at all because I think he felt that it came from Fuller. And he said, I can't look at things like this. They just confuse me. So he was not going to be my mathematical instructor if he wasn't a visual mathematician. So, good night. Thank you.